What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you today with our top 12 Dynasty tight end rankings, closing out our positional rankings. Again, if you want to see running backs, if you want to see wide receivers, quarterbacks, we did those in recent days. You can go check them out. But today we're talking about our top 12 tight ends, talking about the strategy that we employ at this position in startups and trades, all that kind of stuff. Because this position, while it's the least important in fantasy football, for those of you guys who play in tight end premium leagues, I'm sure it does matter quite a bit. If you guys want access to all of our dynasty rankings, positional rankings, bucketed rankings by age, 2023 prospect rankings, all that is available over on our Patreon. If you want to check that out, patreon.com/fantasy stock exchange. But before we get into the video, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And yeah, we already kind of went through the glamour positions of fantasy football, your quarterbacks, your receivers, your running backs, all of that fun stuff. But I mean, sometimes you just got to roll up the sleeves and talk about the grunt work players. We got to talk about the tight ends. And yeah, I mean, you guys will see in terms of value, in terms of production, it's very, very top heavy, both in dynasty and in redraft. And it's reflected on our rankings. Some of these guys, especially at the top, offer a significant positional advantage. And once you get realistically past, the first few guys, you're probably best suited to just punt the position.
Yeah, exactly. The tight end position is not one that is, fruitful. It's not a lot of players at this position that we love having in dynasty leagues, but there is a couple that are pretty good, and we'll spend most of our time on those guys. But after that, we will rattle off the rest of our top 12. So before we get into it, leave a like if you enjoy, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Let's hit the intro. All right, so the tight end position, the strategy is pretty simple. We know that tight end is one of the most frustrating positions in all of fantasy football because there's very few good tight ends, so much so that I don't even really think it's a necessity to have one locked in unless you're a competitive team. Like if you are a rebuilding team and you can't get a good, price on a guy like Kyle Pitts or a good price on maybe one of these middle tier young guys that we're going to talk about, then what I like to do usually is just to load up on mid-round guys or late-round guys and hope that you hit big before you're ready to compete. And then if you do, maybe you have a long-term tight end or maybe you have some trade chips. If not, I'm just going to take shots in the rookie draft on, a couple of the good tight end prospects that we have coming up with Michael Mayer, who obviously will fit his way into these top 12, probably top 6 tight ends as soon as he's drafted. And then, in 2024, we have guys like Brock Bowers and Jatavion Sanders and a couple other guys in that class. So this position's not great. You're going to, sometimes have to hit on a David Njoku late in the draft, Greg Dulcich late in the draft, Dawson Knox late in the draft if you want a startable tight end in the long term, a usable tight end one. But if you get one that's great, they should be higher value inherently given the nature of this position, which is why we value a guy like Kyle Pitts so highly, like we're going to get into.
Well, I mean, if we're just looking at this list in its own right, okay, the young tight ends for the most part, we're all kind of heralded prospects. You guys would have already saw that, but they're all heralded prospects as we know. But some of those older guys, like you mentioned, Dawson Knox kind of came out of nowhere. Dalton Schultz kind of came out of nowhere. Darren Waller absolutely came out of nowhere. Like a lot of these guys, I mean, even David Njoku, he was a first-round pick, and he was always heralded amongst dynasty rosters, but he fell off the graces once he, that couple year stretch where he struggled until this year. He was a mid-teen round type of startup pick. So a lot of these players, a lot of these, valuable players are guys that you're getting later in your drafts. And again, you kind of mentioned it, but one of my favorite strategies, if I miss out, on a high elite or, mid-tier type of tight end in my first 10 rounds, just take some shots. Like look at the situation, potentially look at the opportunity around the league, look at who's good at developing tight ends and kind of take sophisticated shots on who can be the next Dalton Schultz or who can be the next Dawson Knox. Because as you kind of said, you're getting the value of a mid-tier to late-tier tight end one without paying the opportunity cost of that.
Yeah, because if that player becomes, like Pat Freiermuth, who's like a top 7-8 round startup pick in a tight end premium league, then you obviously gained a lot of value. But for the most part, if you miss on that pick, it's not going to hurt you too much because
exactly.
you spent 14th, 15th rounder on the player. So a guy that you absolutely do not have to spend a 13th, 14th rounder to get, a guy that we think is the most valuable tight end in fantasy football and dynasty fantasy football, one of the probably 5 most non-quarterback valuable assets in Superflex leagues, a guy that we have assigned in our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0 with a rookie pick value of 2+ first rounders, even after a semi-disappointing second season in the NFL, is Kyle Pitts, tight end of the Atlanta Falcons, who is the tight end one for us of our rebuilding bucket and overall.
Yeah, Kyle Pitts is like one of the ultimate ball pieces in Dynasty, basically. Like, if you are against Kyle Pitts because he didn't have a good second year, you're basically just fooling yourself, realistically, because year 2 tight end commanding a 27.3% target share and a 34.3% target rate not only is just really good, like, we're talking historic levels of volume this year. The problem with that is that Atlanta had an historically low passing volume in their own right. So even though Kyle Pitts' peripherals were elite amongst the elite, it didn't matter because Atlanta was throwing the ball less than 24 times a game. The thing with Atlanta that's very, very encouraging, especially if you own some Kyle Pitts stock, is that they are in striking distance of a quarterback, whether that's developing Desmond Ridder, whether that's, maybe making a play at a guy like Ryan Tannehill, Derek Carr, somebody like that in free agency. Heck, maybe Lamar fucking Jackson, who knows? Or you're picking in the top 10. Maybe you take a guy like Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, or maybe you trade the pick for a guy. You have a lot of outs here with Atlanta to get that set quarterback in. Again, I'm not expecting them to just develop, from a 24 pass attempt per game offense to like a 35 pass attempt per game offense within the year. But can that number be closer to 30? And if that number is closer to 30, Calvin Ridley already traded out of town in Jacksonville. We know this guy commands volume. We could be looking at that third-year prime breakout that we were craving from Kyle Pitts this year. He's sort of like, the theory, right? That post-hype breakout. We were talking about a couple guys, going into this year, going into last year. We expected a lot from them in their second years, maybe even like a CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins going into last year. And they had their breakout years this year in terms of points per game. So I wouldn't be shocked if Kyle Pitts was the next on that list. Freak athlete, freak talent. Realistically, him and Drake London should be commanding about 30% of the target share each in this offense next year. I wouldn't be shocked if he was a legitimate, 15, 16 plus point per game scorer.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we know Arthur Smith is probably not going to architect the most pass-heavy offense in the NFL, but if they get a guy like Ryan Tannehill, if they get a guy like Derek Carr, if they get somebody, or if they just roll with Desmond Ridder, we saw a shift towards that, historically low pass attempt volume with Marcus Mariota, who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn anytime he threw the ball, to an offense that was, at least functional as far as a passing game. And Drake London reaped the benefits of it. Obviously, Kyle Pitts was injured at the time, so we didn't get to see what he would do. But still a guy, who's ranked among the top 10 tight ends in PFF receiving grade over the last 2 years. And that's important, right? We know he's a good player. We know he can command targets. The only problem is the peripherals haven't caught up to the actual production. And that's why you can get, a mini discount on him. I know in our startup draft that we did about week 12, week 13 of the NFL season, I was messaging you. I'm like, dude, I got Kyle Pitts at the 2-3 turn and a tight end premium, which to me was insane because, in that type of format, to me, Kyle Pitts should be a first round pick, given his age, given his profile, given what we've seen from him so far. So you can get a sizable discount on Kyle Pitts right now. He's the gold standard, right? The guy that you want to rebuild every dynasty roster around. If you don't have him, then you probably are fine to just punt the tight end position overall. Look for a Bowers, look for a Mayer, look for one of these, future draft prospects.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say this right now. If you don't have Kyle Pitts, this is your best opportunity buy. There's pessimism around him, but realistically, you're getting an asset that probably should not be tradable. Like, we're talking about one of the few players in Dynasty that you could offer, a package out of the wazoo, and it's still a contemplating type of, reaction to it, because that's the level of value he can hold if he hits his ceiling. If he goes out next year, 22-year-old tight end with this athleticism, with this frame, and he goes out and has an 18, 19 plus PPR point per game ceiling, this is a guy that can legitimately go top 6 in startups, especially in tight end premium.
Yeah, exactly. So another guy that is quite valuable, but for a different reason, with Mark Andrews, who is tight end one of our contending bucket. Obviously, you're getting more production out of a guy like Mark Andrews right now. He's still relatively young, 27, 28 years old, but he's not going to have the longevity, the positional value that a guy like Kyle Pitts does. But even still, we have him rated as a guy that would require about 2 first-round picks in a dynasty league to be able to acquire. So Mark Andrews, I'll let you take it away with him.
Yeah, no, it's pretty simple with Mark Andrews. You're getting a ton of volume here. 26.6% target share last year and a 29% target share this year, back-to-back years of elite production, elite target share there. He had a phenomenal start to the year. In his first 6 games, prior to him getting hurt, battling injuries, prior to Lamar Jackson getting hurt with that knee injury, in week 11, week 12, in those first 6 games, he had 57 targets, 39 receptions, 455 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, even better paces than what he did in his breakout season back in 2021. So you saw the potential, you saw the upside. And if you took him in that 2-3 turn area in redraft leagues, you were getting a significant advantage at the tight end position. Realistically, this fantasy season, we're summing it up as that Travis Kelce, elite value over replacement year. But Mark Andrews could have definitely been in that discussion had he stayed healthy, had Lamar Jackson been healthy for this offense. Obviously, again, we understand he had a very, very disappointing end to the season, but that creates a huge buy window for a clear top 2 asset in Dynasty. I still think this guy should be going at the back of the second at the latest in terms of startups. And currently, you probably might be able to get him for mid to late third type of startup value, given the disappointing end of the year, given the uncertainties about Lamar Jackson. This is the perfect time to buy Mark Andrews.
Yeah, exactly. People will overestimate the impact that injuries have on one given season because we know that injuries are fluky. Sometimes they derail player seasons. What we do know about Mark Andrews is that he's a clear tight end 1 advantage when he's on the field and when Lamar Jackson is on the field. And even if Lamar Jackson is gone, which I don't anticipate happening, I think they're going to be able to work something out. Then we should have a guy that is still, in line for a great amount of volume in that offense. Number 3 on this list we have is George Kittle, who obviously is a very talented tight end in his own right. Probably, for my money, the best pure tight end in the NFL. Tight end 2 of our contending bucket. He is, again, a little bit older, 28, 29 years old, but is going to be one of the more productive tight ends that you can get. And he is actually the final tight end of the first rounder plus type of territory in terms of rookie pick value that you wanted to send to acquire a tight end in a dynasty league.
Yeah, 100% with George Kittle. We all know that he's a superstar talent. Him, Travis Kelce are the tight ends of this generation, if you will. Ever since, Kelce got drafted back in 2013, Kittle, I believe, 2017?
2017, yeah.
2017. So since they've come into the league, they've been phenomenal. He is a great player, both, blocking, receiving, efficiency. We've seen it over the years. The only problem I kind of have with Kittle now that was a little bit worrying when I was doing my research here is that the volume this year wasn't quite the same that it was in his prime years. 19.8% target share, still a really, really good total. Don't get me wrong. But we're looking at a guy that since his rookie season was a guy commanding, 25, 26, 27% of the targets. So falling from, the mid to even high 20s in targets he was getting in previous years to the 19.8% is a little bit concerning for his week-to-week consistency, if you will. However, as we know, despite limited volume, this is still a guy that can break a game open any given play. Elite yards after catch, had 11 touchdowns this year with a rookie quarterback playing half the year. So it's very, tantalizing to think if we get the Kittle of old from a volume perspective and still, keep the efficiency he showed last year with Brock Purdy, with Kyle Shanahan in this offense, I mean, we could be looking at, a Travis Kelce type of season coming in the next couple of years. Again, the only problem I have, though, is if the volume does stay the way it is, expect a lot of volatility on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around George Kittle's dynasty value because we don't know if it's going to be Trey Lance next year, if it's going to be Brock Purdy next year. We also have, unlike George Kittle's rookie season or the prime seasons of his career, Brandon Ayuk's a superstar player, man. And so is Deebo Samuel. So, and you have Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield. Now, the too many mouths to feed narrative is overplayed, but in San Francisco, it's almost like the one exception I'll make to the rule where it's not too many mouths to feed in the fact that we're just copy and pasting target shares to player. They're all really good. So they're all capable of commanding high target share type of numbers. And, it's possible that a guy like Brandon Ayuk gets moved this offseason if they don't want to extend the guy. But for the most part, I worry a little bit about George Kittle's ability to continuously command elite targets. But the thing that I have no problem admitting about George Kittle is that even on a 19.8% target share, he can still be a top 3 tight end because he's just that good, and so is the offense.
I absolutely agree there. Again, it limits his overall ceiling to potentially, having the best tight end season of all time, like his talent might potentially dictate. But, I mean, he's still probably a top 3 to 5 lock any given year, given his yards after catch ability. And, I mean, we saw touchdown upside this year. Even when he was getting those volume years, realistically, this is a guy giving, 6 to 8 touchdowns a year. He had 11 touchdowns and he was battling injuries at some points in this year. So if you're getting that type of efficiency, that first read in the red zone now too, and he can, potentially maybe work back up to a 22, 23 type of figure. Again, this guy could be a top 3 tight end probably for the next, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of tight ends can post their career high number in touchdowns with 3 different quarterbacks throughout the year. It's pretty impressive what he did this year. And another guy who, this time last year, we were heralding as potentially a guy that could climb into this bucket, into this tier, is Dallas Goedert, who's tight end 3 of our contending bucket. Career high 19.4% target share on the Eagles this year. That broke out, obviously. We knew that this too many mouths to feed argument was going to come into play with this Eagles offense coming into the year, but A.J. Brown was an elite wide receiver in fantasy. Devontae Smith finishes a top 15 wide receiver. Dallas Goedert, when he was on the field, was an elite tight end. That's kind of what happens when you have a bunch of great players, is that usually your offense is better.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the funniest, debate all off season where we're getting, an offense that looks like it could potentially be elite, but we find ways to, detract it. Oh, well, he's competing with this guy for targets, or do you really expect Jalen Hurts to make that jump? Or are we sure this offense is going to be a top 5 unit, or is it more so in that 10 to 15 area? All of these, narratives were basically driven last year that made all of these Eagles assets cheap. We're talking about, A.J. Brown, an elite receiver going in that 2-3 turn. Devontae Smith going in the 5th, 6th, 7th round at times, and Dallas Goedert like the 8th or 9th. It was pretty insane going back. But I mean, with Dallas Goedert, it's pretty simple. 19.4% target share, like you kind of said, attached to that great offense. Quarterback took a big step, and we saw, especially prior to that injury, again, good overall season, but especially prior to that injury he suffered against the Washington Commanders, he averaged 13 PPR points per game in that week 1 to 9 stretch. That is a very, very good total. That is like perennial top 3 to 5 tight end type of total. Again, a little bit older than you would like. He's now 27, 28 years old. So, he doesn't really have that, let's say Kelce, let's say, Kyle Pitts overall ceiling. But if you're banking on a guy that can be, a top 5 level tight end for the next 3 to 5 years, similar to George Kittle, I think Dallas Goedert is your guy. I think these guys, including the next guy we're going to be talking about, kind of, are lumped together in that mini second tier, because I think Andrews and Pitts are like up here, and then these next 3 guys are kind of in their own mini tier, if you will.
Yeah, and they kind of go back to the point I said earlier with the tight end strategy, where I don't even really want to roster a guy like this until I'm ready to compete. Agreed. Because they're going to give you points, over replacement at the position. And if you're trying to tank or rebuild, then they're not the youngest guys in the world, right? Kittle's 29 years old. Dallas Goedert just turned 28 at the beginning of January. The next guy that we're going to talk about is in his mid-30s now. So definitely not ideal for rebuilding teams. But again, if you're ready to contend, go out and send offers for these guys. You can get George Kittle in trades right now for late first round picks. You shouldn't be able to, because he is a very highly productive tight end. But there is leagues with the uncertainty, like I mentioned, where you're going to be able to do that. Same goes for Dallas Goedert. The final guy that of this tier that you would probably need to spend a first rounder to get, and then the rest of the tight ends you probably can get for early second rounders and lower, is Travis Kelce, tight end 4 of our contending bucket. He's going to give you elite production. There's no tight end that we're going to take in a 1 to 2 year production window over Travis Kelce. But that's only valuable if you've drafted a win now team, right? Prior to that pick, right? Because Travis Kelce, I've seen people tweet out like, oh, I'm doing a startup right now. Look at my team. And it's like a win now roster. And they got Travis Kelce in the 4th, 5th, 6th round. But you need to make that decision prior to taking Travis Kelce. And I would say if you're drafting a win now startup, if you go in, let's say you pick at the 1-2 turn and, Dak Prescott and Jonathan Taylor fall to you there or something like that, and you want to go with like more of a win now type of build, your number one priority has to be securing Travis Kelce, because absolutely nobody will provide you the value over replacement that Travis Kelce can provide at his position. Even though he's an older tight end, we haven't seen him regress. Even though he's an older tight end, we know that his offense runs through him, which is something you cannot say about pretty much any other tight end in the NFL. Even if they add a receiver, I'm really not that concerned. I know Travis Kelce will be, the CMC level advantage when CMC is healthy at his position, probably even more so than a guy like Christian McCaffrey, or in a win now position. He's going to be more of an advantage than, Stephon Diggs or Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams or Cooper Kupp can even give you at wide receiver. So Travis Kelce's tight end 5, just given like overall value of the tight end position because he's older, but nobody's going to outproduce him the next 1 to 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument probably all the way up for him to be tight end 3, if you really will. If you're more, a competitive team and you realistically aren't as ageist as we are, you probably have Travis Kelce a little bit higher in your own personal rankings, and that's fine, because realistically, like you said, the value over replacement for what he can do from a production standpoint is like no other in fantasy. Like, you can make the argument. You mentioned McCaffrey. You mentioned, even some of the elite quarterbacks over, the back end quarterback ones. Travis Kelce giving you 20 PPR points per game versus the next closest tight end giving you 14, 15 is a huge advantage over the rest of your league. Talking about a guy that can potentially be a top 5 pick in redraft. So yeah, no, I definitely agree with Kelce. Again, you kind of mentioned it though, nearing 34 years old. We're still getting that elite production, but just for how much longer? There's more volatility to his market value where if he has, a 16 and a half, 17 PPR points per game season, his value is going to half.
Yeah, and that obviously would be not your concern. If you're getting 16, 17 PPR points per game 100%. Out of Kelce, you're probably competing, and that's going to help you win. So he's one of those, like I've said this about Derrick Henry before, he's one of those assets that I'm cool just riding into the ground. Like you don't really have any option because his value is going to keep decreasing, and you kind of just have to accept that when you make the pick. So what you should do is line your bench with, Trey McBrides and Jelani Woods and like young tight ends that could eventually maybe take over for Travis Kelce and probably just have to be caught holding the bag when he eventually retires, whenever that ends up being. Maybe it's, could be as soon as this year after the Super Bowl if Kansas City wins. We never know with a player of this age, if this, realm, because, usually tight ends don't play into their mid-30s, and Travis Kelce has probably already secured his Hall of Fame career, so he's not really playing for a ton more other than, the love of the game kind of thing. So we can get into the next tier of tight ends, and we'll speed these up now because they're like less important as far as startup value is concerned. But these next 3 guys are pretty much the last 3 guys that I'm comfortable with, like drafting in the mid rounds, holding through a rebuild, even though, maybe I'm not ready to compete right yet. I think these guys are considerably better than the remaining, 4 tight ends or whatever that we're going to talk about. And I'll let you start with a guy who took a big step this year with David Njoku.
Yeah, 100% with David Njoku, tight end 8 and finish in terms of points per game, despite being limited in a few games, 10.6 PPR points per game when he was healthy. And when it comes to David Njoku, it's pretty simple. You guys have already heard our thoughts on Deshaun Watson. Obviously, very bad year this year, 55 PFF grade, but he did miss a lot of the portion of the offseason, a lot of, team structural stuff, building that chemistry with his weapons. He's going to have a full offseason this upcoming year, and we have more of a sample size of him being an elite quarterback than we do of him being a bad quarterback. So we're optimistic that Deshaun Watson can, capture that level of play. And if Deshaun Watson captures that level of play, we're looking at an elite quarterback with a 26-year-old tight end coming off his career best year, athletic freak. He's probably, other than Kyle Pitts, maybe the second most athletic tight end in the entire NFL. Like, he's literally built like a Greek god if you've ever seen that guy. But I mean, talking about him though, production wise, really good this year, especially prior to that injury, giving you a significant advantage over the rest of the field, a legitimate top 5 level option at tight end. And if Deshaun Watson gets back to that level of play, like I said, we could be looking at the next, Dallas Goedert type of breakout.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty simple. Like, we wrote this guy off, and then he got an extension, which showed a lot of, belief in him by the team. And then they kind of ran their offense a little bit more through him. He started to play better. And now we have a guy that, like you said, could eventually be another like league winning tight end if we get Deshaun Watson playing at his, pre-suspension levels. Yeah, I like David Njoku all the way up here. We have him listed as a hard buy in our Dynasty Rankings Manifesto 2.0, which we have in there. We have, holds, hard buys, soft buys, hard sells, and soft sells based on their current keep trade cut value. And David Njoku is not valued near the tight end 6 that we have him ranked. He's valued more so in that like 10 to 12 range because people are still hesitant on Watson and on what Njoku showed this year. A guy that we do have listed, more so in the soft buy hold range is Pat Freiermuth, who's tight end 2 of our rebuilding bucket. I think he's one of my favorite rebuilding targets because you do not have to spend a very high pick to get the guy. He usually goes in like the 8th, 9th round, even though he's a young tight end who's shown quite a bit. I think people forget that that we don't typically see tight ends do much of anything their first 2 years in the NFL. And 9.5 PPR points per game over his career so far with a broken Big Ben, with Mitch Trubisky and a rookie quarterback is really, really impressive when you think about it. If Pickett can be, a Tannehill, Derek Carr level quarterback, maybe even better than that, because he has shown a couple flashes here and there. We're talking about a tight end who's primed for a year 3 breakout this year, who's going to probably increase in value. He's going to have, the stink of too many mouths to feed on him, just like Dallas Goedert had going into last year with Deontay Johnson and George Pickens there. But this is a guy who's commanded 7+ targets in over half of his games last year. Like, this is a dude that commands volume and has more, juice than we kind of give him credit for. He can score touchdowns. He can break away some long plays. We saw that this year. He's not just, Hunter Henry or something like that. He's a guy that can be, maybe the new generation Zach Ertz, and you're getting him right now in like the 8th, 9th round at 23 years old.
Yeah, no, 100%. When it comes to Pat Freiermuth, realistically, like you said, he earned the volume that he got this year. Like, he went out there, he had almost, a 19.5% target share. on a team, like you said, with a lot of turnover at quarterback. Mitch Trubisky starting the year, Kenny Pickett finishing the year, still a rookie, competing with targets with Deontay Johnson and what's called George Pickens on the outside. Like, yeah, like Freiermuth showed everything that you wanted to see from him from a progression standpoint in his second year. Now he's entering year 3. You're going to expect the volume to keep going up because usually, I mean, tight end should be a slow burning type of position to develop. Pat Freiermuth's already showed all the signs that he's on that path to developing in his first 2 years. You get Kenny Pickett in his second year feeling more comfortable. You're getting more efficient looks at the goal line, especially for a guy that has shown that he can come down with those 50-50 balls inside the red zone type of area. Like, yeah, I'm all in on Pat Freiermuth at this value. I think, again, like you said, still extremely young, 23 years old. You can get him now. You can stash him. Maybe, he's not going to have his apex in terms of points per game next year. But, long-term, especially within the next, 2 to 3 years, he's going to be a top 5 tight end in the NFL. He's going to be a top 5 tight end in fantasy football.
Yeah, and I believe in the Steelers to be able to develop Pickett into like a solid quarterback. And for what it's worth, Freiermuth has graded similarly to Kyle Pitts in terms of PFF receiving grades from the same draft class, who are the consensus tight end 1 and 2 of that draft class. So, as much as we value Kyle Pitts highly, it's not like Pat Freiermuth has been that much worse than him over the first 2 years of their career. And TJ Hockenson, the guy that we can kind of transition to next, again, the last guy of this tier of like, I'm comfortable rebuilding around these guys. TJ Hockenson is tight end 3 of our rebuilding bucket. He will be in the contending bucket pretty soon. He's like 25 and a half years old right now. TJ Hockenson was kind of a punching bag for this YouTube channel for a year or so because he was just so mid on Detroit, right? Everybody was clinging to the profile, top 10 pick. Everybody was excited about him, but he never really showed us anything that would indicate that we should be excited. But this year, he finishes a top 4 tight end in points per game, which is the best finish he's had of his career. He commanded at least 6 targets in 10 of the 11 games he played with Minnesota since being traded. And that usage without any long-term number 2 receiver on the team outside of Justin Jefferson makes me think that we might even have him too low right now, considering what he did this year. And also, the fact that he's still young and he had a great profile.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, that was kind of, one of my main bits on the channel, just calling TJ Hockenson, TJ Blockinson, talking about that he didn't earn targets, that he wasn't really that athletic, that him and Dalton Schultz were just kind of like 2 peas in a pod, if you will. And I mean, we'll get into Dalton Schultz in a second, but yeah, with TJ Hockenson, as soon as he got traded to the Minnesota Vikings, he took a step up, whether it was as a player, whether it was earning volume. I don't know what really happened. Maybe, somebody mixed something into his Kool-Aid. Who knows? Like he ended up developing into the player that Detroit had envisioned when they took him in the high first round area. So yeah, you can make the argument he should be a little bit higher, number tight end 3 in the rebuilding bucket. If you want to rank him ahead of Pat Freiermuth, you want to rank him ahead of, maybe even David Njoku, go ahead. But realistically, this is the reality of the mid-tier of the tight ends where we can make bull cases for all of them, but ultimately they all lie in that same tier of being not good enough to enter, the elite points per game, value over replacement area, but still having enough value to be ranked, in the top 10.
The one thing I will say, though, in defense of Hockenson is if he does exactly what he did this year, and from a target perspective, commanding that level of volume, and it's just him, Justin Jefferson, and Osborne and Adam Thielen again, we're talking about a guy that could be a top 3 redraft tight end this time next year. For sure. And that's nothing to sneeze at. I do think we never really saw that kind of upside in his range of outcomes, and now it's suddenly a possibility for TJ Hockenson, and not just a possibility, he pretty much did it this year when he was there. So number 9, like you said, kind of teased at it. Dalton Schultz, tight end 6 of the contending bucket, a guy whose value could definitely be in flux, though. We could be probably moving him down in a couple months because he did play on the franchise tag this past year. If he's back in Dallas, which I think is the best place for him, he can be a top 6 redraft tight end yet again. He's still fairly young, 26, 27 years old. But if he leaves, there's not a ton of situations that I like better than the one that he's in right now. He's a solid player, but would it shock me if some bad team overpaid him in free agency and he ends up being like the next Trey Burton? No, absolutely not. I think that could totally happen. I hope he stays in Dallas, but Danny's kind of shaking his head like there's no way that they can afford him.
Yeah, this just kind of feels like an Austin Hooper type of situation where, he's a good tight end. He can get targets. He's, a steady contributor on the offense. But let's face it, he's not an elite tight end. He's probably not even in the tier 2 of real life talent. It's kind of remarkable because if you're a Dallas fan and you're watching Dalton Schultz every week, you have a certain, lower perception on him than if you're the outside contributor and you're looking at what he's doing from a statistical standpoint. To put it frank, he's been the number 2 target on this team, which not only says people think, oh, that speaks volumes about him. That speaks volume about the lack of receiving talent in that room outside of CeeDee Lamb. Like, it was honestly hard to watch the level of, how out of it he was this year. Like even in that playoff game, all throughout the year, you could just kind of tell that he was mentally checked out. He didn't really want to be in Dallas anymore. The team didn't really want him anymore. You're looking at the successes in short, sample sizes of a guy like Jake Ferguson, a guy like Peyton Hendershot. That it sucks because I don't want to talk about, a former Cowboy like that or soon to be former Cowboy, but yeah, he's going to be a guy that's getting, 10 to 12 plus $million per year on the open market. And the team that pays him that amount is going to be very disappointed. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say in defense of Dalton Schultz is he was tight end 5 last year with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup healthy. So he can show the ability to command targets. So I don't think that should be taken away from him. So even if he goes to a new team, he could be like a target hog type of dude. I just think the efficiency that we've seen from him in Dallas, and like you said, he probably shouldn't be the number 2 of that offense, but he was this year, and it definitely kind of downticked his own efficiency. When Cooper and Gallup were all healthy in 2021, he was a much more efficient tight end, scored more touchdowns and stuff, which made me I actually really loved Dalton Schultz coming into this year from a fantasy perspective, but the injury set him back, and obviously some poor play as well. So we can kind of move off of Dalton Schultz, moving to tight end 10 is Darren Waller, tight end 7 of the contending bucket. He's definitely really fallen from grace since, a couple of years ago. Injuries have absolutely killed this dude for 2 years, and I'm sure they've killed you if you drafted him. I know in one of my redraft leagues 2 years ago, I drafted him in like the 2-3 turn, and he was absolutely awful. He's getting up there in age now, too, and his quarterback is gone, probably, right? We already know Derek Carr's pretty much said he's going to be gone. He's probably going to be replaced by like a rookie quarterback or maybe a bridge quarterback or something like that. Waller himself also probably on the trade block. If they go out and they get a rookie quarterback, are they going to want to hold on to, a 29, 30-year-old tight end? He's already actually 30 years old. And, have him kind of coax in a new rebuild, a new era with a rookie quarterback. I think there's teams out there that might give, the Raiders a 2nd-round pick or something for Darren Waller. And I think he could just be moved overall. Tight end 10 and tight end 6 in points per game the last 2 years, dealing with all those injuries. He's kind of just been, pedestrian when he's been on the field and injured the rest of the time.
Yeah, no, he's the definition of depreciating asset. If you bought him in startups after that elite stretch that he had over the course of a couple of years, these last 2 years definitely didn't do you any favors. Like he probably went from a guy that was worth, a mid to late first to now you'd be lucky to get a second for him on the open market. And that's just the cold reality of an older player not being able to perform. So, Darren Waller, I think if he's healthy, can maybe have, a resurgent type of bounce back year, especially if he gets, like you said, put in a better situation. Maybe he's traded to a, contending team. He can operate as that number 2, number 3 type of weapon, used, less from a volume standpoint, but used in a lot more high efficient type of situations. I think that would make a lot of sense for Darren Waller. So, moving off of Darren Waller, and the next guy that we're going to be talking about, the tight end 4 of our rebuilding bucket, is Greg Dulcich. Going into his second year, the situation, obviously, of course, our expectations coming into the year versus what we expect now, completely night and day. But what we do know about Greg Dulcich is that he's a good player. Tight ends with a 16+% target share and a 10+ ADOT in either of their first 2 seasons. So the list prior to Greg Dulcich was Kyle Pitts, Mark Andrews, and Jimmy Graham. Now we can add Greg Dulcich into that list, and a rookie tight end showing that much level of promise, 2nd-round pick, coming in, really operating even when Judy was missing time, Sutton was missing time. Greg Dulcich was still able to keep afloat in the NFL. Now with both those guys healthy, another year of Russell Wilson, maybe, Sean Payton added to this offense as a head coach, I really, really have high expectations for Greg Dulcich. He is one of the guys that I'm targeting. I mean, you mentioned Pat Freiermuth. Greg Dulcich is one of the guys I'm targeting as well, because if I'm going to, look at that, mid-tier tight end outside of some of the young guys, your Schultzes, your Wallers, that type of range, I would just rather punt and wait for a guy like Greg Dulcich in the double-digit rounds.
Which is crazy, considering that he could easily be a 6th, 7th round, maybe even higher startup pick this time next year if he has like a top 10 season. And if you're in a rebuilding window, I mean, the guy's still 22 years old right now. You got a lot of time before you have to worry about his production. If he continues to build upon that, we know tight ends don't generally peak until, year 3, year 4, year 5, sometimes year 6 or 7 in the NFL. So if Greg Dulcich is already showing those signs as a rookie, who knows who the quarterback will be? Maybe Russell Wilson's equally as terrible next year, and they cut bait with him, and they go out and draft a new guy, and then suddenly Greg Dulcich is the number 1 receiver for Caleb Williams or something like that. Like we have no idea, what's going to happen. in the future. And I think Greg Dulcich, just given what he's shown, is definitely worth that type of investment. The final guy that we're going to talk about, we can close out the disgusting range of the tight end position. And again, anybody outside of this range, you want to take shots on, a guy like Noah Fant, who is a great athlete, Evan Ingram, if he returns to the Jacksonville Jaguars, kind of some honorable mentions here. Cole Kmet had a pretty decent season. Trey McBride, still a highly touted rookie. Chigo Kronquo and Jelani Woods, some of these other rookies had, nice little seasons. Daniel Bellinger and a couple other guys, Kate Otten as well. But for the most part, this last guy's going to be Dawson Knox, who's tight end 8 of our contending bucket. He's kind of shown to be one of these like boomer bust tight end options in terms of like a touchdown or bust kind of guy. He plays in one of the best offenses in the NFL. He is now attached to that offense because he signed an extension last offseason through 2026 with a guy who is his best friend off the field, apparently, in Josh Allen. So we know he's still young. We know he's athletic. We know he absolutely could have a 12 touchdown season in his range of outcomes because he plays with a quarterback like Josh Allen, who, if he stays healthy, and he dealt with an elbow injury this year, has the capability to throw 45 touchdowns on a given season. And Dawson Knox could definitely be a huge beneficiary of that. And I think when you're in this range of the draft at the tight end position, drafting a guy who's, again, still young, athletic, and attached to a great offense is probably a decent formula.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Dawson Knox, like you kind of said, the elite peripherals, scoring touchdown upside. The only problem that's going to hold him back is that he doesn't command an elite target share. However, I mean, outside of Stephon Diggs, nobody on that team is really, really consistently commanding targets. So with Dawson Knox, at least you're getting the efficiency of this scoring upside of an offense that we expect to score, at or close to 30 points per game every single year that Josh Allen is at the helm. So yeah, I agree with Dawson Knox. Again, you mentioned a couple guys you could have maybe listed some fun, potential rookies that, went onto the scene this year. But for the most part, Dawson Knox, I feel like, has proven that he should be at the back end of these top 12 rankings.
Yeah, and I mean, the Bills realized this year probably that they had like 2 major problems. It was receiving weapons outside of Stephon Diggs and probably their run game. If they wanted to take their 27th overall pick and trade it for Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins or something like that, it wouldn't shock me. And while that hurts Dawson Knox's target share, he's not a high target share guy. If they had a great number 2 wide receiver like that, that would, up the ante of the whole offense and allow him to score more, which is what we really want out of Dawson Knox. He's great, for half PPR and standard leagues, not so much in PPR, tight end, premium type of format. So if you guys made it to the end of the video, again, 37 minutes talking about tight ends. I know it's not the most glamorous position in the world, but we really appreciate you for making it to the end. If you did, comment down below, made it to the end of the video, tight ends kind of stink. But yeah, check out the Patreon if you guys want access to all of our rankings. Like I said, we have, buy, sell, hold advice in there, rookie pick values, bucketed rankings by age, everybody's date of birth listed in there. So you know how old everybody is. It's very, very intricate. It's very, very detailed. And I think it's some of our best work. So if you want access to it, check it out over there. Also in the process of building these 2023 draft class databases as well. So you can get, some film study in if you want to go and watch your, film and look at some of the metrics and see who's good at what and start to formulate opinions about these players. Of course, we'll have you covered for all that stuff as well. If you want to stick around here, hit the subscribe button, comment any of your thoughts down below, and hit the like button if you enjoyed. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.
Wire me the money.